Hello, and welcome to the House Party podcast with Ivory Innovations. I'm Jenna Louie, a director at Ivory Innovations. Our organization is dedicated to catalyzing innovative solutions in housing affordability. This podcast will tap incredible people from our innovations network. We will bring you the top entrepreneurs, researchers, and practitioners in the industry to shine a light on housing affordability solutions. Let's get the party started. Today, we're excited to welcome Tiffany Pang, CEO and co-founder of Outreach Grid, to our podcast. Tiffany was born and raised in San Francisco and has seen how cities have evolved and struggled with the challenges of people falling through the cracks. Stagnant wages, increased cost of living, gentrification. These economic stressors, coupled with limited resource literacy, can lead to housing instability and complicate someone's ability to successfully find housing when they're in a tough situation. Having worked in Silicon Valley, Tiffany brings a skill set and interest in helping cities become stronger through tools to understand and combat homelessness. Prior to Outreach Grid, Tiffany was an early employee and software engineer at Instacart and studied neuroscience at Yale University. Tiffany was also recognized by the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for her work with Outreach Grid. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jenna. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's our honor, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what you're building at Outreach Grid and how you got there. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your story. What made you want to start a company like this in the housing industry?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in San Francisco to a single immigrant mother. San Francisco 20, 30, I'm really old now, 30 odd years ago, looks very different from what it is today. I went to high school there, then I went to college on the East Coast. And when I came back to San Francisco, it was like a totally different town. A lot had changed about the city. New startups came in, right? There's this new tech startup thing that started happening in San Francisco, and cost of things started going up. So cost of rent went up, cost of food went up, cost of living in general in the city went up. And what I started noticing was people were sort of falling through the cracks. Homelessness was becoming more of an issue as I was, living in San Francisco as an adult and having a job at a tech startup like Instacart. In the backdrop of all of it was San Francisco. And on my commute to work, I would see like human feces on the ground. This was not a thing that I had seen before when I was growing up in the city. And I started thinking like, what is happening in our town? What is happening in my hometown? Why is it that there are human feces on the ground? Why did I step in human feces? This is a terrible experience. I'm very upset by this. And I had just become a software engineer at Instacart. I had done night school to learn to program, to learn coding. I worked my way up to do little software projects, and I wanted to take the skills that I had in working at a startup and like doing software engineering to see if I can help the city address homelessness. How do I better understand the problem? Is there anything that I can do with the few skills that I have and do something about it? And what started me off on this track was I started going to like civic tech programs like Code for America, where we were trying to understand civic tech problems that can be solved with engineering. This was back in like 2015, 2016. And through these kind of meetups and these kind of groups, I got connected with the then mayor Ed Lee's office in San Francisco, where they were starting this new initiative called Startup in Residence. They connected upstarts, startups, and like engineers with cities that had very technical problems. And they were able to outline their technical challenges that they wanted to solve. And one of them was homelessness. And I asked my co-founder, who was my boyfriend at the time, and now fiance, and we're going to get married this year, is this something interesting to you? Is this a problem that we want to spend the next 10, 20 years of our life trying to solve, this intractable problem of homelessness? And we both said, yeah, I think that's a problem that we want to solve. We both had experience in homelessness when we were in college doing outreach. He was doing outreach at his university. I was doing outreach at my university. San Francisco is my hometown. I wanted to find ways to help solve this homelessness problem. So we took on this challenge through the Civ Tech program. We applied. We were very fortunate to get in, and that's how Outreach Grid started. We were trying to understand how to map encampments in a city and try to keep track of them, like what work was done for them, what clients were associated to them, and from there it became a whole new system because we realized just how big of a problem data is in homelessness.
Wow. Well, there are so many things to unpack there, but I think two threads I want to pull on is one, I think recently a lot of people, housing has always been in the news and housing has always been an issue. And I think the word intractable really resonates, right? For a lot of people who look at housing and think the housing crisis we have now has been decades in the making. Sure, it may be worse than ever before and there may be really visible signs of it, but it's something that's been going on for a long time. But we have some new tools. Kind of the second thread I want to pull out is that we have some new tools, whether with tech or data or new ways of thinking that are really helping us address something that's really been an issue that people even far before us have been noticing. And so on that end, on the new ideas and the new solutions that have been coming up, can you tell us a little bit more about outreach groups? You've described how you got started with your then boyfriend, now fiance. How has Outreach Grid grown since then, since that idea as a startup in residence to where you are now?
That's a great question. So for the past 7 years now, we've been having conversations with people experiencing homelessness, outreach workers, shelter operators, housing navigators, case managers, executive directors, like mayors, state representatives, people, members of Congress, people sort of at all levels of homelessness to understand what they care about in homelessness. From the moment that we started Outreach Grid through this Civ Tech program, we've been having conversations with all these different people to understand what they care about in homelessness. And what we discovered was people who are at the funding level, people who are dispensing funding, building policies about funding, they care about certain things. And then people who are on the front lines of homelessness, they care about certain things. So, but the data that is collected currently, or back then in 2016 in homelessness, all the data that was collected supported the people who were setting the policy, who were setting the funding. Less so for the people who are on the ground trying to coordinate all this work together. So we built Outreach Grid to sort of bridge that gap, to address the needs of the frontline staff who are service providers, service agencies, who are dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, people experiencing homelessness, and also the funding requirements that are put out by like the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who's like the biggest funder of homelessness, and try to bridge that gap between them. So Outreach Grid today is a data platform that enables agencies to work together on homelessness information from first contact to housing on one platform in one language at the point of work. So there are two sort of key ideas that's part of that description of Outreach Grid. One is that we enable service agencies to collect data at the point of work. And two is the idea of agencies working together to combat homelessness together. Not one single agency is dealing with it. Not one single city is dealing with it. It's really a collective group of agencies who some of them deal with outreach, some of them deal with shelter operations, some of them deal with housing navigation, case management. There's like a whole spectrum of this like system of care. And we want these agencies to sort of work together. So the idea of point of work is we enable service agencies to collect data at the point of work. You would be surprised how, as consumers, we kind of enjoy the benefits of things like Instagram. We can expect things to work very quickly. We can put like a post out there and have instant feedback from our friends. In homelessness, we don't have that kind of data. We don't have that kind of feedback. A lot of the data that gets captured is by paper and pen. And then, or even on like a physical map to say, okay, the encampment is over here. And I literally put like a push pin over here. And then every month we gather around and give feedback for the fact that we saw encampments at at these locations. So the feedback cycle is a lot slower. when it comes to using data. The agencies don't tend to talk to each other, and so what we built is sort of the ability for agencies to talk to each other inside of Outreach Grid. The analogy I like to make is kind of like a cafe. If you're running a cafe and you have baristas who are making the coffee and exchanging money for that coffee, you're logging. Typically, baristas would log that transaction into some system. In homelessness, there's no such system. There's not like a point of sale system where they log the transaction of their services when they do the work. They kind of do that separately. They have two different books for it. They do it on paper and pen. And these systems don't talk to each other. One agency does it one way, another agency does it another way. Cafes have point of sale systems, hospitals have point of care, and Outreach Grid has point of work. And we're trying to introduce that into the homelessness space. And so since the beginning of the Civ Tech program in 2016, since our beginning, we've since built like a suite of tools, including encampment management, being able to map out encampments in an app, being able to do client management, and case management in an app, being able to do shelter reservations, being able to dispatch roving vans through our app to get outreach workers to respond to non-emergency homelessness related incidences out in the field, housing navigation tools, all of these tools that let you collect data when you dispense services to clients, and so that you can help clients get to the next stage of homelessness faster.
Wow. And can you walk us through a little bit, from the insider perspective of, you've just talked about the different stages, you've talked about the different stakeholders who are involved at some of these different stages. What might that look like for a client or a person going through the Outreach Grid system?
That's a great question. So I think one of the tools that really captures that idea is our shelter reservation tool. So how it works prior to us creating this system was, and we learned about this because we, as a team, everyone would go on outreaches. Everyone was shadow agencies. It's kind of part of our DNA that we have to get out of our office to do outreaches and be very empathetic when we build back in the office. So during one of these outreaches, I was out on the side of a freeway. We were under an overpass and we found an encampment, and there was a client there who was around, and they said, okay, I'm ready to go into a shelter. I've been here for a long time. They didn't say I've hit my moment of lucidity, but effectively what it translated to was I have a clear mind right now. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to receive services. And that's a very rare opportunity for someone who has, mental health issues to be able to say, okay, I'm ready to help myself now. And I've got an outreach worker in front of me. Let's get me into a shelter. It's 80, 90 degrees out, super hot, super muggy. It doesn't feel great to be standing out and about. And we wanted to get this done really quickly. But what the outreach worker had to do that I was shadowing was, he said, okay, wait, I need to call shelters. And so he starts calling the shelter. Some of them don't answer. It takes, some of them said, oh, we're full, try again later. Maybe we'll be free in a week. Do you know if people are checking out soon? They said they don't know. We tried like a list of different shelters to see, okay, is there a bed for this person who had this moment of lucidity, who's ready to go to the next step, but we're like stuck at trying to find a bed for them, which was a very not great experience for the person who is experiencing homelessness, for the person who is trying to help this person, the outreach worker who's trying to help this person navigate through this very complicated system of care. And also for me who's shadowing because it's super hot and doesn't feel great outside. So I took that experience. I went back to the office and I said, this is ridiculous. We can put dog faces on our face through an Instagram filter, how come I can't get someone into a shelter and know what beds are available? So we built this shelter reservation tool so that outreach workers, people who are on the field, encountering people who are experiencing street homelessness, to talk to shelter operators through an app. And no longer do you have to call someone, email them, get a voicemail and then like have it returned to you a week back and have some like no determinate time for fulfilling this promise that you're making to a client who's experiencing homelessness. Now you can do this instantaneously. And that really captures the idea of being able to provide service at the point of work, and also building these virtuous cycles and relationships between agencies that need to work in homelessness to communicate together.
That is a really powerful story, Tiffany, because that I think there's so many people who are really well motivated in the housing industry and really excited about working on some of these solutions. But when you hear about this is what's actually happening on the ground, this is why, even if someone wants help and even if we want to give them help, which can be a rare moment, it can be hard to make that happen because systems and the lack of tools and just historically things have been done on pen and paper and people call each other and sometimes someone doesn't answer their phone. And so hearing how you are helping to solve that is really exciting. And I am thrilled that Outreach Grid is in our finalist group this year. I want to ask a little bit more about that kind of frontlines perspective. And so, people experiencing homelessness are often some of the most visible representations of the housing crisis that we have in the country, but we don't always hear their stories, and there can be a lot of misunderstandings about this population. So what's something that maybe you wish others knew about your work with Outreach Grid or with the organizations and outreach workers that are helping people who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about like people experiencing homelessness. I think there's like a very common, well-known misconception that there's this idea that they're just lazy, or they need to be more willing to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I think that kind of narrative falls short of explaining why there's so many people falling into homelessness. I think a more productive question would be something like, how do we treat people when they fall into homelessness in such a way that it doesn't rely on like their will or their ability to no longer suddenly be homeless? Do people need to be encouraged to move forward when they fall into homelessness? Yes, absolutely. Mental health is a huge piece of this. So what can we do about our systems of care to encourage people who fell into homelessness to move forward and have the mental health and have the capacity to go from street homelessness into a shelter, to start working with a case manager to get in line for a housing waitlist, for example. I think there's ideas I would want to convey. There's this idea of service resistance. I don't think that narrative is true, because I've seen moments of lucidity. I've seen people who would have been categorized as service resistant get to a point where they were working with an outreach worker, they were working with a case manager, and they were able to reconnect with them and then get them to want to help themselves again. And once they overcome that barrier and they've reached that moment of lucidity, that's when your system of care, your emergency shelters, your rapid rehousing voucher disbursement program, your property housing navigation programs need to be very responsive to be able to capitalize on that moment of lucidity, because it is rare. It is very rare. And that's not, a thing that's exclusive to the homeless population. That's very human. When people encourage us to change, we're very slow to change. But when we, get to the point where, okay, everything else has been settled away, I have some mental capacity to think about, oh, this is something I want to work on, then that's when you work on it. And it takes time, it takes some patience. And for systems of care, they need to be very responsive for capitalizing on that moment of lucidity. And secondly, one thing I would want people to know about homelessness in general is that navigating these systems of care is kind of like navigating in kind of like a dungeon, like a video game dungeon where it's very complicated, it's very complex. Even people who are supposed to be experts, like case managers, outreach workers, they have a hard time knowing what do I do with this client who's ready to go, what their next step is. They have to fill out all of these forms. They have to establish their eligibility. They have to make sure that this form is the right form. That gets really complicated really fast. So with these systems of care, we need to do a better job at making them transparent and easy to move through. Because if the experts are confounded by the system, how can we ever expect someone who's experiencing homelessness, who have all these other burdens that they carry with them, to be able to navigate it too?
Wow, I am really glad that you have shared this with us. I think one of the other podcast guests that we had on this season was John Green from a company called Black Star Stability. And something that John mentioned is also just the importance of trust. And I really heard you mention that, um, I think implicitly in what you just described, where a lot of people who are in hard situations have been failed by systems before. It's really difficult when systems have failed you, or when things have not gone well and someone comes and says, I can do this for you, and you say, well, can I believe you? Because I've trusted people before, and I haven't always gotten great results. And so I think what you're describing in terms of how can you help someone build trust, how can you help a system be transparent enough that you can trust that it will have a bed available for you at this address, at this time, for this period. All of that I think is an area where it's really exciting to hear that data and transparency and technology, can make that work so much better than it has in the past, when people are just looking to be certain, right, about what you're trying to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust is huge. And that's what, outreach workers do, case managers and outreach workers do on a day-to-day basis. They work with people experiencing homelessness. They build a very human connection with them so that they trust them to say, okay, are you ready for the next step? Are you ready for the next step? I'll take you to the next step. And I can guarantee it for you if I know the system better. If I know that there's a bed available, it makes sense.
The last thing I want to ask is about the rest of the year. So what can we look forward to in terms of what you're working on with Outreach Grid? Or do you have any predictions for the housing industry in general, or for what's taking place in the market?
So I can speak about Outreach Grid. So one of the projects that we worked on earlier this year. So dispatch allows us to work with cities that have dispatch systems, so your 911 calls, to help alleviate some of the calls related to homelessness. Some cities that we were working with have this very acute problem where their emergency response agencies, like fire, like police, like medical services, they're being called and summoned through the dispatch service that, there's a homelessness incident happening here, dispatch your services to them. But they're not necessarily the best people to respond to incidences of homelessness because they're not trained, they're not expected to know, the next step is to bring them into a shelter. The next step is to connect them to an outreach worker, to their case manager, right? So what we've built is a dispatch service that routes non-emergency homelessness related calls from 911 dispatch into Outreach Grid. That becomes an incident in Outreach Grid that gets assigned to roving vans. So these roving vans have outreach workers in them. They're the ones who know how to get them into a shelter. They're the ones who know how to refer them to the right people. They're the ones who know how to, engage and talk to people experiencing homelessness to say, okay, you are having, you need to follow up with your case manager. You need to do this, you need to do that. They're the ones who can coordinate that for them. And Outreach Grid is sort of the data backbone that supports this. When a call comes in, it gets put through our system. It gets sent out to these mobile vans. There's like a Uber-like experience of the van like driving to you kind of thing, so that we can, and we're working on this in cities in Orange County, where we're working at the Hope Center in the city of Fullerton. And one of the refrains of the Hope Center, the motto of Hope Center, is to get the right resources with the right people at the right time. And so our dispatch service is something that that really encompasses that idea. And we're hoping to work with even more communities who have roving vans, who have roving outreach teams to be able to respond to incidents of homelessness like that.
Wow. Every part of Outreach Grid and every program and kind of initiative that you've mentioned has sounded really awesome. And this is a great example of something that we would love to see in more places. It's obviously powerful when you can bring the right resources to the right people at the right time in the right places. And so, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being a guest with us on House Party with Ivory Innovations, and hope to talk soon.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Thank you.